What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another video today, and in this video we'll be taking another look at my collection. Today I'll be showcasing my Western Airlines fleet. This fleet isn't as big as some of the other fleets I've showcased here, with just 9 aircraft, but I'm pretty happy with the progress of this fleet in particular. As most of you know, if you followed me, especially with the Retro FSD project, which I haven't really gotten back to in a while, this has been a big airline for that project since they served FSD for so many years. They started here in July of 1957 and continued up until 1987 when they merged into Delta Airlines. And then Delta continued that operation for a few more years until around 1994. Delta Connection intermittently from there until they merged with Northwest, who had obviously served FSD for many years, leading all the way back to the days of North Central, which started around the same time as the Western services did. So, very awesome fleet, and all these planes are pretty rare. Western Airlines is another one of those airlines that the models are very much sought after for people's collections in the retro department, and these all proved as their own set of challenges to collect. But really only one of them was fairly easy to get since it was a new release, and that's the one that we will start off with. And that is the 1-200 Electra by Gemini Jets. Bit of a surprise release that Gemini made in the October 2023 batch, which is the same batch as the Delta Connection Embraer 175, and I was more excited about this release than the Delta, since the Delta they had already hinted at a month before the formal release, so we knew it was coming at some point. It was just a matter of when were they going to actually release it. So fortunately, I picked this one up around Christmas time, and I just love this thing. We'll be doing a retro review on this at some point down the line. I don't know when exactly yet, but it will be in the series in the future. And then we move on to the sort of prop era / early jet era with the Indian head livery from the 1960s. There are a couple iterations of this livery depending on the aircraft type and the year. They had quite a few types during this time, and I have pretty much all of them, minus the DC-3, which Western also had. I have not been able to find one of those, but I don't really need that model in particular, since Western used the Convair 240 and the DC-6 primarily when they first started flying here in the late 50s. So we'll start off with the smallest Western model. This is the Convair 240 by Aero Classics, and that's what a majority of the fleet is made up of. And there's 2 Geminis in here, which is, it's a little surprising, but Western has made a decent presence in Gemini's fleet. Actually 3. I missed one initially, so there are 3 in this fleet, so a third of it actually. But this Convair 240, I picked this up, ordered it late 2022, didn't get it until the next year since I'd ordered it so close to New Year's. But this model actually arrived with a broken landing gear. The nose gear and one of the main gears, latter of which was actually snapped off, so that proved a challenge to glue back on. And I had the same problem with the North Central Convair that I got earlier this year, but in this case it was very much a challenge to get this glued back on, just because it was snapped off rather than just a clean cut from the base of the aircraft. But fortunately this glued back on, and I have not had any issues with it since, and it sits proudly in the Retro FSD shelf. Right above that is the DC-6, which, as I mentioned, Western also used on flights to Sioux Falls, and this was also one of the aircraft that they had on Champagne flights back in the early days. And once the Electras came in, most of those Champagne flights, they switched over to those more glamorous aircraft, and the DC-6 was relegated to lesser routes over time. But this DC-6 is also an Aero Classics release. They actually made 2 of these, and I have the earlier release from around the mid-2000s. And this one I got around, I want to say, I think it was Christmas of 2022, so this is back when the project, when I had started it, and really made a push to get as many models as possible, and I built up the fleet pretty quickly, starting with a couple acquisitions in the spring and summer of 22, and then airliners in Chicago, I got a few then, and then that Christmas haul was pretty much focused on Retro FSD models, since I really wanted to get the project going, and the fleet got built up pretty quickly, and I'm really happy with how fast the fleet in general built up, and then Western, of course, making quite the growth in the collection to speak of it as well. And then the last of the prop aircraft, we have the other Electra. So this is actually roughly, yeah, it's the same livery as the 1-200 model that I have. This one also an Aero Classics release. This one for sure, I know that I got around Christmas of 22. This is released under the Greenbox sub-brand of Aero Classics, which is one of several that they have because they tend to not get licensing from the airlines, and I'm not sure how stringent Delta is, especially with the Retro Airlines, because yeah, they own the IP for Western stuff if they even have it anymore, but they may not even have it anyway. So whether or not, you know, back then it may have been different because this was released in like 2007. It may have been different then, but nowadays, you know, every now and again you'll see a Western model still get released, and hopefully that does continue. But as for this Electra, it is super nice, and I did feature this once in the 1968 Retro FSD update, which I did right after I got the North Central DC-9, one of several that Aero Classics has made, and hopefully we get more of those, and I will do my collection on that once I get the last of the 1-200 models, so still on the hunt for that. Right below that, this was, well, part of a white whale, technically. The next 737 that I have, that one's a true white whale, but this one, Western 737-200 with the Indian head livery. This is made by the Seattle Model Aircraft Company, or SMA, and, you know, they made a lot of really rare models, and they are hard to find these days. And this one, unfortunately, suffers from zinc rot, but the good news is it's only on the main landing gear. I've not noticed it spread in the time since I've gotten it, and since this model was released over 20 years ago. If this was a really bad zinc rotter, I think this model would be dust by this point. So the fact that it is pretty much in one piece is great. And the only other defect has been some tarnishing, so, you know, it is what it is, and the real-life thing would have had some, you know, metal polish. The polish would have worn off over time anyway. This I got off of Squatchy's table at Airliners in Kansas City in 2024, and it was quite the surprise because I wasn't expecting to find a white whale, so had to pick this one up, and I didn't know the zinc rot until well after I'd gotten it, and that's probably why it was only $50. If it was in perfect condition, it would have probably been, I would say, maybe in the $75 to $100 range. So, you know, I'll take the minor defects since at the end of the day I'm not going to see it very much, and having a zinc rotter is a bit unique for the collection anyway, since it is a talked about often topic. Now we move on to what is the more recognized livery for Western. This is the Squizzle Stick or Flying W era, and I also have one Bud Light model in there as well. So I'll start off here in the back left with the 727-200 by Gemini Jets, I want to say 2005 release, and this is the one that I got in Dallas for Airliners International. Got it off of a table that was selling just all old Gemini Jets releases from their first 10 years of operations. This was a $59 pickup, which is a really good deal for one of these things. And yeah, like I said, my first Western-ish, if you will, or actually first Western with this particular livery, since I already had a couple of the older livery ones over there. So this is the first for the Flying W era, which, as I've mentioned, is the more recognized livery amongst those that are in the know. Now right next to that, this is a bit of a unique type for Western. They actually had some Boeing 720s for a little while, and they did fly these to Sioux Falls for a few years as well in the late 60s and early 70s. I haven't been able to find any pictures of this aircraft actually being at FSD, but since it is listed in Western timetables, I'm able to confirm such. After 1970, they stopped listing aircraft types on many of their flights. In fact, pretty much all of them. So I don't know why they stopped listing that, because it is neat to know like what aircraft type specifically flew on a given route. But yeah, Western stopping that practice by the time they introduced this branding, I thought that was a bit silly. But maybe there was some internal reasoning for that. But this is a nice Aero Classics release I got off of. I think this was another. This was another Squatchy's purchase, now that I think about it, because, yeah, this definitely sounds like something that I would have gotten from him, just like the 732 Indian head over there. Now, this is the true white whale. This is the 732 Swizzle Stick by Aero Classics. This, for sure, was from Squatchy's. I actually found this, had a friend alert me about it as well, and I got this for a really, really good deal, since this is obviously a big aspect of the project and one of the 3 white whales. And I know I've talked about that project in the past, and I will try to get to it at some point, but I can't guarantee when that's going to come out for sure. Once I figure out some other stuff and just get through all that, then I will eventually get started with that project, since I have talked about them often before I was able to get them all. And then the last of the Western models that I have in my collection currently is the 737-300 with the Bud Light livery, as they like to call it, even though the color that Bud Light uses for their branding is blue, so Budweiser, I think, would be a more applicable term for the branding, since that one is actually red color, and that matches in the case of Western. So this is the last livery that they had for a few years right before the merger with Delta. Some of the DC-10s got it. I think a couple 727s might have gotten it as well, if I remember right. And the 732s also got this livery before the Delta merger. And Gemini released this in 2019. They actually had a bit of a spree with the 733. They did a United Sol Bass one as well, which I also have, and then this Western Bud Light one, and they did a US Air one a couple years down the line after that. So there we go. That is my Western Airlines fleet. Very nice lineup of aircraft, and all these are pretty rare nowadays, especially the 737s are very hard to find. The 720, I know that one proved challenging. In fact, all of them had their own set of challenges that I had to go through just to get them, and then the only one that was easy, just because it was a new release, was that 1-200 Electra by Gemini Jets. So I definitely want to grow this Western fleet more. I want to get the DC-10 at some point, since I know that was a very big part of their fleet very later on into their existence. So hopefully I'm able to find the white top spaceship. They used to call them spaceships, which I thought was interesting. So hopefully I'm able to find one of those for a good deal, and I will certainly add that to the retro collection, since my DC-10 fleet has grown after the Atlanta airliners. I picked up a Continental Globe and a United Friendship one. Both of those are super nice models, and yeah, hopefully I'm able to add more of those DC-10s, because the DC-10 is a very nice aircraft type, and I will definitely do a My Collection episode on that type later on. With that being said, that is the end of the video. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.